All right, so it's a great privilege for us to be here and be very excited because today we're gonna talk about something so value adding. And joining me today is the CEO and the writing coach of Trivium Writing. This is a Canada-based company. We've been working together ever since. It has been 3 years, I guess, and we're so much we have so much learning from the previous project that we had, and let me introduce him. His name is Leandre Larouched. Hi, Leandre.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. It's a great opportunity to have this conversation with you again, and I'm sure people are so excited about what we're going to talk about because people would like to really converse more in terms of the English language. And let's talk about our previous project. And we're launching this once again, relaunching the architecture grammar. But before that, before we're going to talk about the architecture grammar, I'd like to know, and I'm very interested to know about your personal story. I'm sure people who are watching right now, they're also very excited about who you are, your story, and your passion in life.
Yeah. So just as you mentioned, my name is Leandre. I grew up in the province of Quebec, Canada. So English actually isn't my first language. I grew up speaking French in that very French-speaking region of Quebec. When I was a teenager, it became increasingly clear to me that I wanted to build a career, build a life in the English language. And so I started studying that language very meticulously. And eventually I mastered the English language, but it came, the hard way. And during that journey, I learned a lot of different things that I would ultimately notice or kind of take it for granted by native English speakers. So for a little bit of context, after I graduated college in Quebec, studying arts, letters, and communication in French, I moved to the big city. I moved to Montreal. I took a bachelor's degree in English literature and professional writing at an English-speaking university called Concordia University. And so I studied English the hard way, as I said. But then I was hired as a writing assistant by the writing center at the university. And so I started working as a writing tutor, writing coach for other students. And Concordia has this incredibly large population of international students. So I worked with people, um, from all walks of life, from all backgrounds, from all linguistic backgrounds. And that's where I really learned how challenging the English language can be. And that's essentially what started off Trivium Writing, because I had one student in particular that prompted me to kind of go beyond the traditional instruction that we have when it comes to the English language. And I was able to see that because I was a non-native English speaker, because I had gone through some of the same things as she had gone through, because I had this different perspective. So in that regard, I always tell people the fact that you do not speak English as a first language is not a disadvantage. In fact, in many ways, at least in my case, it's been a great advantage. And this is true in anything, but we can use what we could consider as disadvantages. We can use that for our, just like I did with the English language. And so that has really propelled my professional career, because after I graduated from university, I taught a little bit in the United States on a Fulbright fellowship. But then I decided I wanted to really pursue that method that I had created while working at the Writing Center. I wanted to develop that, I wanted to share that with the world, monetize that. And that's where Trivium Writing came to life. It came to existence because I wanted to share that method, what I call the architecture of writing. The architecture of grammar is a part of the architecture of writing.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's really how children writing came to be. And that was because of the fact I was not a native English speaker.
Oh, that's great. You're the perfect model or an example of a person who can really become so proficient in the language, even if your first language is really French. So I remember
Yeah.
during the time when we were conversing about grammar, writing, the language. I told you about our concern in the college where I'm associated with. It's Green Valley College. I told you about the difficulty of people in speaking the language because our first language is our dialect. It's in Ilonggo or Philip or our national language is Filipino, and it's difficult for people to speak the language, the English language. So we decided to come up with a certain book called Architecture Grammar. So tell us more about the architecture of grammar and what do you think is the benefit if the person will study the architecture grammar?
hmm Yeah. So the architecture of grammar initially started off as one part of writing. And what ended up happening is that as we worked together, you and I, on an individual basis, you saw some of the material, you thought it worked really well, and so then you asked me, to consider putting that together in a book that could be used by the college. The reason that this methodology works well is that it is extremely practical and almost mathematical. So, whichever language you speak, whether it's English, French, Filipino, any dialect, everybody understands numbers and mathematics because it's a universal language, it's a universal logic. And so I use that same approach to talk about English grammar. And in that sense, English is extremely logical, it's extremely simple. And in fact, that's why English is the language of commerce. That's why, a Canadian, even a French Canadian and a Filipino will most of the time communicate in language. And it's the global language because it's actually extremely simple the way that it's evolved, at least from Old English. And so there's a very practical structure or architecture to the English language. The problem, though, is that it's not taught that way in most schools and in most books. And so what I've done is I've really looked at what's behind the language, put that together in a linear, streamlined, practical way, put that into 30 short, simple lessons. And so that really gives a view into what makes the English language the English language. So for anybody who does not speak English as a first language, this is the best resource to start with because it starts at point zero and then it gives you everything that you need in order to, speak and write fluently with the English grammar.
Oh, that's great. So why do you think, Leon, can you share your insight about this? Because some people might ask, oh, there are a lot of AI tools already out in the market, and why do I need to study
Mhm.
grammar? And what do you think is the reason? Why should I study about the grammar?
Yeah, so the reality is, at least as of right now, AI tools are able to generate text, but it will never, like at the moment, it can't generate something specific. It can't tell your life story. And I've seen it many times before where people kind of give a bullet list, some instructions about their life, and they ask, say, ChatGPT or some other AI tool to write their life. It just doesn't sound human. It doesn't sound natural. It's not specific enough. There's a number of things that we look in great writing, one of them being specificity. I won't go over all of these today, but just to take the example of specificity, AI really struggles with that. And so there are a lot of things that we need to write ourselves. And even when we can use AI, and for transparency, I use AI a lot. I use it for research, I use it for draft, I use it for brainstorming, use it in a lot of different ways. But at the end of the day, I always end up editing whatever AI provides. And the way that I'm able to edit it in a way that actually sounds great is by knowing the fundamentals of English grammar. I'll give you an example. One of the things that you learn through the architecture of grammar is all the components in a sentence. One of these components is parts of speech. One example of a part of speech is an adjective. And one of the rules of great writing use strong, meaningful adjectives. And the biggest problem right now that we see with AI is that it just uses so many unnecessary adjectives. And so if you do not know the fundamentals of writing, including the fact that you shouldn't be using all these fluffy adjectives everywhere, then you are going to hurt your credibility. And at this point, ChatGPT has been publicly available for long enough since November 2022 that everybody knows what ChatGPT sounds like. And when you put out something that exactly sounds like ChatGPT and doesn't have a trace of human element, uh, that's damaging to your reputation. So I think the best thing you can do is, yes, leverage AI, but know the writing fundamentals, because then you can save time, which is what AI does. That's really the main benefit of AI. It saves you time, saves you energy for doing research, brainstorming, creating a draft. But then you need these fundamentals of the English language, of grammar, of good writing. And that's what the architecture of grammar and the overall methodology of the architecture of writing does. So AI and architecture of grammar, they're perfectly compatible because it's the element of saving time. And then this the element of actually producing great work.
Oh, that's great. You've mentioned very essential matter. Leverage AI, but we have to know the fundamental of grammar, the fundamental
Correct.
principle. Yeah. Thank you, Leon. In my community, you know that I work with a lot of pastors, Christian entrepreneurs, and one of the things that they're sharing with me is about their difficulty in speaking English language correctly or accurately. So, what do you think would be the benefit of those people, if they're going to study the architecture grammar, what do you think will be the benefit of AOG to those who are having difficulties in learning in speaking the language?
Mhm. So, what the architecture of grammar does at a fundamental level is it gives you a framework to look at writing. And that framework through which you look at writing essentially informs how you can read like a writer and also speak like a speaker. And so, what's really important when it comes to learning a language, and in all transparency, my main area of expertise really is about the writing element, the speaking. But I can tell you about this because this is something that I've had to do as a non-native English speaker. I've had to learn how to speak in English, and there's a huge difference, between speaking French and speaking English. But one thing that I recommend is taking that framework from the architecture of grammar and really analyzing speech and writing from the point of view of that framework. And so, what that framework allows you to do is to break down and notice different things, because the reality is, if you watch a video and you look at how the person speaks and you try to replicate that, theoretically, that would be a good way to go about improving speaking in the language. But if you don't know what the different components are, then it's, you're shooting in the dark what's happening. So with that framework, you can break down the different components of the language and of speaking, and then you can actually learn how to speak and how to do all these other things that you're wanting to do with the English language. So you have that framework, you break down your analyses, and then you learn everything that you need to learn in order to be successful. That's really the main benefit when it comes to learning the language.
I guess thank you, Leon, for sharing that. I guess it's very important to have a structure. And one good thing about the architecture grammar is the framework. My favorite part is the brick by brick method. I really appreciate the
Yeah.
brick by brick method. Thank you. So, what do you think is the perfect time frame to study the architecture grammar?
Yeah, so this is a really great question. The architecture of grammar is 30 short lessons. So technically, you could read one lesson per day and you'd be done with it in 30 days. Now, certain lessons are more complex than others. So I would say at a minimum, at a very minimum, 30 days to read the book, do the exercises, but more realistically, something like 2 to 3 months. Now, reading the book is one thing. I also included exercises in the book so that the reader can actually apply what they're learning. And the great thing about the architecture of grammar is that there is actually a lot of repetition of exercises, because what I've done is I've taken just about every single combination of words, phrases, and sentences example with their sentence. So that takes a little bit of time, but to answer your question, a minimum of 30 days just to get the basic understanding of the methodology of reading the book. But I'll be honest with you, when it comes to really like mastering English and the writing aspect, it's a never ending journey. If I were starting all over, I would give myself a good 6 months to really start, seeing results. But it obviously depends on the level of experience, the level of education that each individual comes with. Um, but I would say to read the book 1 to 3 months to start seeing results, 6 months, and then anything after that, polishing. The one thing though is with the architecture of grammar, the great thing is that it accelerates that process as much as humanly possible, because it really ensures that wherever you're starting from, if you have some gaps, the book will address these gaps. Unlike a lot of other books on writing and on grammar, it often assumes certain knowledge. I don't do that in the architecture of grammar. So, but the bottom line is 1 to 3 months to really get the gist of it, then 6 months and more to really start seeing the results in terms of your writing.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing the time frame. I also believe in the process that's called gradual process. There's nothing. I don't believe in instant process. I think it would be better if we go through the process. It can be maybe long term, but it gradual has a long term impact. So Leon, what are the practical tips that you can give to those who would like to learn um, speaking in English? Those who would like to be proficient in learning English. Um, I guess this will be very beneficial to the pastors, ministers, Christian entrepreneurs in my community as well.
Mhm. Yeah. So the first step is to start with a framework. Um, for example, the architecture of grammar, but any framework, you need a framework through which to look at the language, and you need to understand the components, because you cannot, for instance, do math if you don't understand the different components of algebra, arithmetic, and all these components. So first, your focus should be understanding these components. Once you understand and you know these components, then you need to get deliberate practice. And by deliberate practice, I mean studying the language, looking consciously at these elements. So this is something that I do now naturally. Anytime I'm reading a book, I think about these components of the architecture of grammar. It's just how my brain works. And so what I always encourage students, clients, everyone really, is to start reading like a writer. There's the front end of the writing, and there's the back end. The front end is the content where you read the experience. The back end is the architecture of grammar. It's the same thing with public speaking. when you hear me speak, you hear the content, you understand what I'm saying, and there's my intonation, there's the way that I, my gestures, there's all of that. So there's always a front end and a back end. So in order to get good, you have to understand the back end. And that's really, I can't overemphasize this part, because the reason you have people, even at 50, 60 years old, and who struggle with writing, is because they have spent 50 to 60 years of their life reading the front end, but never the back end. You need to understand the back end, and you need to put deliberate practice into the back end. So every single day when I'm not writing, I'm probably reading. But by reading, I'm actually learning. When I'm in my bed at night reading a book, I'm still learning how to write. So you have to do that as well. Then you have to start. When you read something that you enjoy or that you don't enjoy, something that provokes positive emotions or something that provokes negative emotions in writing. Let's say you read a book and you read one chapter, and you're like, that book's not good, I don't like it. You have to ask yourself, why? Again, this goes back to the back end. So the back end is baked into every part of that learning process. So that's why I can't overemphasize this ever. It all goes back to the back end. So you want to think critically about why you like certain types of writing, why you like certain authors, why you like the social media post. And you have to look at the back end and then ask yourself, how can I use that in my own writing, in my own speaking? If somebody uses short sentences or uses words, you want to understand what they're doing that is evoking that reaction from you. And then you want to be able to possibly embed that into your own style, because the pinnacle of good writing is having your own voice, having your own style. When somebody reads something from you, they know it's from you because they can hear your voice. This style, this voice, it's the amalgamation of a bunch of different things. Some of them come from other authors. At the end of the day, writing and the language, there's only so many things, only so many elements. There's a finite number of things. And that's what the architecture of grammar set out to do, to expose as many as possible of these combinations for the reader. So there are only so many of these things. So we're going to pick some from other authors. For instance, Hemingway was known for writing very simply, really short sentences. Perhaps that's part of my style. So I didn't invent that. I didn't invent writing short sentences and being very clear and to the point. So I have to be aware of that as I am learning and as I am perfecting my skills. I want to be aware of what I like, what I don't like, and embed that into my style. Again, it goes back to the back end, the framework. So that's why I said first, you need to understand the back end. Second, you want to read like a writer. You want to keep analyzing, getting that deliberate practice with the back end. That's number two. Then number three, you want to use that framework to analyze what you like and don't like. Think critically about create your style and your voice from these components. So these are the three main tips that I would give people. So understand the back end, the framework, read like a writer. That's the deliberate practice. And then think critically, build your style, your voice, again, using the back end.
I appreciate the three main points that you've mentioned about learning the back end. Analyze. We need deliberate practice, and then I think the third one is really more of really having. having that drive to also understand your own voice. It's like having
Correct.
your
Yeah.
own design, having your own pattern. You don't have to copy and paste the works of others. If you don't have to really um um like copy and paste the style of others if you have your own style as well. So Leon, thank you so much. I really appreciate this time together. It's a value adding conversation. I guess if there's one thing that you would like to share, what would be that particular like final word that you would like to share to those people who would like to master English as a language, and you wanted them to be inspired? What do you think will be the opportunities awaiting for them if they will practice speaking English correctly?
Yeah. So two main things, and the first one is applicable both to native English speakers and non-native English speakers. In fact, maybe even a little bit more native English speakers, but I think this is important nonetheless, which is that, and this relates to the question of the relevance in the age of AI. When you master the English language, or writing, if you will, that opens up a world of opportunities. And really, the reason why grammar is so important, and the reason I'm so passionate about it, is that grammar is the code by which we communicate. That's the language. It's literally it's like the programming language. Your computer does not work without, I cannot access the internet if the programming language is not there. That's the foundation of it. Grammar is that to communication. And without communication, nothing happens. There's no leadership. Literally nothing happens without communication. So understanding is important because it helps you communicate. So it helps you get what you want, and it helps you think more clearly. And this is why I say that this perhaps is a bit more applicable to native English speakers, because in a way, if that's the language you already speak, it's like that increases your thinking. But this is true as well for non-native English speakers, because any language you master the grammar, you master how to use the language, it just clarifies your thinking. And so all these years after mastering the English language, I find myself thinking so clearly. And it's one of the reasons why if somebody asks me a question spontaneously, what I do, and we just did that now, when you ask me about the 3 tips, I didn't really think about what these 3 tips were going to be, but instantaneously, I knew, okay, I thought about it. It was very quick. And then I was able to give you like 3 concrete tips immediately. And so that's what writing does to your brain. It makes you very quick and makes you very sharp. And so it's so invaluable to think like that for a variety of reasons, whether it be for leading people around you, leading your team, leading your organization, just being persuasive in general, and making good decisions. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when you learn another language and when you master another language, I sometimes joke it kind of gives you another life. So somebody not very long ago, I was telling them about some of my past adventures, in the United States. And the person asked, "Oh, how have you lived so many lives?" And I joked that every time you learn a new language, you get a new life. So I learned, obviously French, and I learned English. I also learned Spanish, and so understanding these languages gave me a new life each time, because then I come to understand a different culture, a different way of thinking, and there's a lot of power in understanding different ways of viewing the world from different countries and different cultures, because that makes you more self-aware. That makes you more conscious of who you are and the world around you. And that makes you a better person. It makes you more of who you are supposed to be. Because if you stay in your native language your whole life without ever encountering, without ever learning another language, then there is only so much that you have access to, because there are things that cannot be translated. There are ways of viewing the world that cannot be translated. And so you miss out on a lot of enriching aspects to the world. So these are the two things: the opportunities that you get from mastering writing and grammar in the English language, and then of course, learning that second language, mastering, I should say, that second language, because there's a big difference between being able to speak a little bit and being able to communicate with impact in that language. That has a lot of power, and that's what I say. It gives you another life.
Thank you, Leon, for sharing value adding insights. I really appreciate what you have shared. I believe the entrepreneurs, Christian entrepreneurs who are listening right now, they will have that great perspective in terms of learning English language as a way of really enhancing themselves in terms of communicating with their team, and also they will be able to expand their horizon, their own network as well. If they know the language, they can do business even outside of the country. And for those
Mhm.
pastors, ministers, leaders, if they learn the English language, they will be able to communicate well wherever they are across the globe. They can always share the gospel. So thank you very much for what you have shared, and looking forward
You're very
for
welcome.
more engagement and conversation like this with you. Yeah, God bless you, Leon.
Thank you. God bless you.